Great. All right, welcome to everyone here, everyone joining us online for the not quite final Design by Technology series. We have one more speaker at the end with Show LTU here at the College of Architecture and Design at Lawrence Tech University. I'm thrilled to be joined by architect Karilyn Johanesen, Senior Associate at Solid Objectives Edinburgh in New York, or SOIL, as often we refer to the firm. Two quick sort of housekeeping things. One, turn off your phones. Second, for freshmen, as always, don't forget to do the passport QR code and get the points for today. I'm Gretchen Wilkins, chair of the architecture program here in the College of Architecture and Design, and this is our Design by Technology lecture series where we bring inspiring designers from the college's 6 degree areas: architecture, interior design, game design, industrial design, transportation design, and graphic design, to share work that is defining the future of these practices and the multidisciplinary spaces between them. Karilyn Johanesen is a licensed architect and senior associate at SOIL, playing a pivotal role in overseeing projects, guiding design development, and managing construction administration for the firm's internationally recognized body of built work. Most recently, she's been working on residential projects in Brooklyn, timber high-rise in Amsterdam, and adaptive reuse right here in Detroit, transforming the historic marina on the Detroit River into the Stanton Yards waterfront district. Maybe we'll hear a bit about that today, I don't know. I can say personally from teaching this semester in ID4 that our students have been looking at the work of SOIL quite closely and really inspired by the work, and so as am I and the faculty, so we're very excited to have you here sharing your work for today. And I think that's it. Please help me welcome Karilyn Johanesen.
Thank you so much for the introduction, and I'm really happy to be here back in Detroit. It's a little rainy, but I think it's gonna be sunny tomorrow, so it'll be great to be here in the spring. It's been a long winter, as you know. All right, so I'll jump right in. Solid Objectives was founded in 2008 by Florian Eidenberg and Jing Liu. Florian, hailing from the Netherlands, Jing Liu from China, they met in Japan, and they eventually started the office in Brooklyn, New York, seen here. We've completed projects all over the world, ranging from scale, small objects, installations, all the way to master plans. Since our founding, the office has really been interested in testing the limits of systems and structures and materials in order to create spaces that invite multiple interpretations and an interaction. Our process also engages directly with ambiguity, so specifically the tension between what is kind of fixed and stable or solid and what is more pliable or translucent or fleeting. And it's within this tension, we think there's more room for different interpretations and ultimately different experiences of the built world. And also for spaces that create experiences that kind of unfold over time rather than just presenting themselves all at once. And materials, we feel, are not just static elements that we can pick and choose from, but they're really snapshots of a much larger process. So whether that's geological time or kind of man-made fabrication, as architects, our role is really to kind of understand these processes and question them and hopefully adjust them for the better. We feel even everyday materials, or maybe especially everyday materials and typical construction processes, can be tweaked or adjusted to produce something unexpected, something that's both familiar but also new. So I joined the office in 2017. This was shortly after the publication of our first monograph titled Order, Edge, Aura. which was kind of a manifesto that introduced an attitude, really, or a very loose set of ideas that guides the work and continues to guide our process today. Last year, we published In Depth, Urban Domesticities Today, and this book collects all of our housing projects, and again, it kind of pushes these ideas into the constraints of the housing typology. So today I'm going to present some recent work of the office, including some of our housing projects in Brooklyn. And maybe specifically, I'd hope to highlight or focus on how we think about the edge in each of these projects. So I'll start with the temporary smaller scale project. Common Thread was an installation for the 2024 Contemporary Art and Architecture Triennale in Bruges, Belgium. The site was a Capuchin monastery, and it's really the courtyard inside of this kind of dense block in Bruges. And it was actually the first time that this courtyard would be open, in contemporary times at least, to the public. So the courtyard was already quite nice, and we felt the idea for this intervention was really to enhance the existing qualities and slow visitors down and use the intervention to kind of frame different perspectives. So our concept was a rabbit tunnel, quite simply. But how do you make this, and why? So we took inspiration from the history of Bruges, which is probably a whole nother lecture, but Bruges is really the center of lace making in the 16th century. And it's something that, although lace is not made in this way so much anymore, it's still very much part of they're very proud of this history. This is the bobbin method. You can imagine a very laborious, crafted process of pins and patterns. And what we wanted to do was translate that. So we worked with Mariana Papachou of TU Delft and her team, who had been creating similarly intricate patterns, but instead of by hand, using high-tech 3D knitting machines. These are some of the patterns on the top that are from the bobbin method, and on the bottom, what ended up being the final pattern for the installation. So we'll talk about that later. So we have maybe a material, a method, and we have a concept, the rabbit tunnel. How do we start putting those two together? So we started with the portal. So this idea, already the site entrance was through a pretty average garage. And so the idea that you're kind of outside on the street and then you enter through something and then you're somewhere else. So we started with the portal and a series of tension arches to create the portal. But to amplify and also complicate this idea of moving from inside to outside, we added this kind of flip to the tunnel, so that you're kind of traveling in, but all of a sudden you're outside. So the process of creating this took almost a year of many, many prototypes, both in Delft, but also in Brooklyn. We worked on many different types of knitting and fabric. Where we ended was with this fabric that has these two sides, almost invert. So there's a kind of piping on the left. You can see that's white, and then when you flip it over, it's black. And then we use that to create the two edges of the flips. There's also a kind of smooth side and a rough side. The tension of these poles was also something that we had not really done quite like this in this way, particularly for a temporary installation. So we worked with Suman Engineering and kind of optimized a system that created some of the rods were stronger material. And so, of course, when you have a system that is a simple arch, it's very easy to know how that's going to perform, how that's going to stay up. But when you all of a sudden flip it, it's very much more unpredictable. So they helped us kind of understand which of these tension rods would have the most force in them. And also the anchoring of this installation was quite tricky because each of these rods, each of these base points are holding multiple rods, and they're all coming in at a different angle. So we kind of thought through this process. I think the initial idea was, okay, it's 2024, let's 3D print them parametrically, it'll be super sophisticated. Not really in the budget, especially with a material that's strong enough. And then we tested some other methods, off-the-shelf kind of adapter, but we ended up going with actually a pretty low-tech solution, which is a kind of eye bolt ring on a rod, so quite simple. Maybe not as elegant as 3D printed, but did the trick. And the installation took 2 weeks, and the whole thing needed to be kind of choreographed. And my colleague, Fabian Poehler, really designed the structure and oversaw the whole installation and had an amazing team also of people working with him. And it was a pretty big job. First, all of the material needed to be obviously sorted and not mixed up because everything was custom, or every shape was quite different. And then on site, some images of the assembly of the arch, and then the flipping of the arch, which has the cherry picker to do it. So the result is, an intervention that is both quite strong but also lightweight. The fabric in the end is translucent, so although you can't maybe get to that other part of the courtyard, you still feel that it's there. And then also it plays with light and shadow quite beautifully across the day. And in general, kind of frames and makes more present these areas of the courtyard that might otherwise go unnoticed. So in the end, people got very lost and confused. So we think it worked, and that is now deinstalled, and we're looking, I think, for a new location. So the next project I'll talk about closer to home, the Martin Luther King Jr. branch of the Cleveland Public Library. Very different constraints. We definitely did not want to get anyone lost. But I do think that the idea of discovery or unfolding experience translates to this project. This was a competition to replace the existing library with a new library on a site just around the corner. So that green is the new site, and the dash is the former site. And it's a public-private partnership. So the library would have residential housing above, designed by another architect. The new site is larger and has a strong presence on Euclid Ave that's running right toward the south. And even though it has a very strong presence on Euclid Ave, it really is a 360-degree building. So Actually, a lot of the people coming will be parking to the north and arriving that way. There's a green space planned for the west and then a pedestrian alley on the east. The former library, seen here on the left, was very small. It lacked daylight and flexible spaces for events. But what it did well, we thought, was announce its presence as a civic space for the city, for the people. So we knew that the new design needed to do that as well. And we proposed a kind of distinct break from the residential above, and then a double height facade that's kind of these vertical pleated folds to create that civic presence. In the center of the library, we proposed a table using the metaphor from Martin Luther King Jr.'s speech. And this table would give shape and functionality to the spaces around it, but maybe crucially become a platform in itself for collectivity, events, performances. So we won the competition with J. Kurtz Architects. They're based in Cleveland. They were a partner throughout the process, design partner. It was a great collaboration, and special thanks to Chris Steele at J. Kurtz and my colleague as well, Emma Silverblatt, for really carrying this project through to completion. It was a long process. But the problem with the competitions is that no matter how good the brief is, no matter how much time they spend on the brief, you don't really have the necessary input. And we knew that this project would only be able to be designed through a really long and careful process with all the different stakeholder groups. So the library, the community, the different institutions that are funding this part of the library. But we did find that having a clear concept at the competition phase did help us to focus this process. So while the budget and the program and geometries were adapted, the concept of the civicness of the facade and the platform and community of what the table represented. So you can see in the exploded axon, the elements of the design were quite simple, but it gave us a system to work within. So there's the facade and the column grid, the table and its articulations and pockets of space, and then on the bottom, the kind of furniture and life of the library that kind of activates it. Yeah, it's important to mention here that as a branch library, they were able to utilize the entire system of books. So there wasn't a huge pressure on this library to have a lot of books there. Basically, the system allows them to get books quickly. So the library really, the program from the beginning was really about creating spaces for the community and a lot of K through 12 activities, working and meeting spaces for adults, and then just generally a lot of flexible space for events and of all different sizes. So in the plan, you can see there's a column grid, a relatively regular column grid, which is coming from the residential tower above. And we didn't want necessarily that column grid to just feel like the result of the residential above, but we wanted to give it more of an identity that could belong to the library itself. So we've rotated each of the columns, and also that helps reflect as well the folded facade on the exterior. So the facade kind of wraps to the columns, and a system of kind of transparent and opaque panels allows continuity, but also kind of openness and opacity where it's needed for the program within. Again, the 360-degree nature meant that all the facades needed to express the civicness of the library, but they also needed to accommodate things like deliveries and loading, as well as the residential lobbies that were part of the building. So having this system enabled us to kind of unify the facade and keep that identity strong around the entire base. The other very important aspect is just the transparency of what's happening on the inside and the outside, making sure that the library was as welcoming as possible for passerbys. And often, because this is almost more of a community space than a library, it's often open at night. So also having this be a kind of show the activities and excitement that's happening inside. So I'll move to the interior now. We have at the facade, there's a large double height space. There's a mezzanine that is pulled in, and then a event space kind of in the middle on the table, this platform. And throughout the space, particularly in the event space, there's curtains which do a few different things. I think one, they add to the theatricality of the space and change it so that every time people go, it's a little bit different. And then they're also quite functional acoustically. So you'll notice that the library is a kind of fully open plan. And if there's some loud teenagers maybe in one area, how do you get reading done in another? So the interior of the library, all of the materials were very carefully chosen, but even the angle of the facade contributes to breaking up the sound and not having that echoey feeling. There's quite a bit of softness in this acoustic. The underside of the mezzanine is this acoustic spray. And so this is the entry. You can see the steps and then a ramp of the table and leading up to the platform. And then behind, that's really the main access on the east for the library entries. And from here, yes, again, you can see like all the way across the library when the curtains are open. You can see up onto the mezzanine. And you can also see that there's tactility to this edge of the table, which is sometimes seating, sometimes becomes a desk for working. Again, kind of curtains, this time underneath the canopy, a smaller scale to create a more intimate space. And then on the mezzanine, another kind of reading ledge that doubles as spillover for events. And this threshold is carefully detailed with wood, and then in areas we have reclaimed wood as well to make sure that this robust concrete superstructure, as civic as it is, also is able to be touched and has a bit of softness to it. And also gives it a bit of its own character, which was quite important in such a space that you need ultimate flexibility. How do you create specificity? So these small details of the wood grain, the softness of the canopy gave that specificity to an otherwise quite open space. So the large performance space itself can really transform from what is a kind of quiet, reflective space to a really joyous event space. There's a large screen that comes down as well for specific screenings, and you could see the projector box there. Many different types of events were able to happen in this space, also while the library was still open and functional. And my favorite maybe is the roller rink, which, yeah, just great. But yeah, I think the articulation of both the outer facade and this table creates places where people can interact and feel like this is their library, but while also keeping it flexible enough that the library can be part of the long-term trajectory of the community and change its program as the community changes. So the third project I'll talk about is Cube House. So we'll go back to Europe. And this project is one of a lot of firsts for our office. It's our first built work in the Netherlands, our first office tower, and our first project to use mass timber at this time. So to give a little context on the site, the Zuidas business district is south of the central Amsterdam, and it was built right on the main line from the airport, so business people could just come in and out very easy. The master plan was designed in the 90s in a very typically Dutch way, which is this checkerboard, and that worked for many years, but the municipality, for this last kind of missing piece, wanted to use this opportunity to change the zoning and really orient this business district to kind of a new future. The municipality in the Netherlands owns and leases the land to the developer, so they have a lot of say over the constraints of the project. So this building was to be a kind of emblem for this next generation. So it meant that the building needed to respond to what was to become this more cultural access, running page north and south here, and also have a lot of sustainability constraints. The site, probably many reasons the site remained empty until now, but one of them is definitely due to this tram line that cuts through it. The entire district has several floors of parking underneath as part of that master plan, but even the parking is like cut by the train. So it meant that this site was actually quite complex to build on, with parking garage, which has a limitation of how much building it can hold, and then this triangular cut where you could build whatever you want. The other element is that, even though the municipality, wants this to be this grand, sustainable gesture of the future, it's still an office tower. It still needs to function by constraints of our, current market realities in the Netherlands, which in the past, have created these maybe a little bit awkward extruded boxes, which is the context. So our approach, strangely, the existing tram line and this awkward triangle, which was the bane of the developers, was actually a designer's friend, because it gave us some constraints to work with. It meant that we had to locate most of the massing on the corner of the site, and that using wood was lighter, so it gave us more floors, so it was more efficient, and the developer liked that as well. Also great for the carbon input. And then in this massing, what you see is we've kind of broken down the scale from the larger mass to differentiate this new direction with its neighbors. And then the rotation responds to that kind of new cultural axis. And then more diagrams, this kind of simple strategy of concrete plinth, a series of wood timber office boxes, and a veil that falls over it and unifies it as a single kind of gesture, which was also another thing that the municipality was quite interested in seeing. Great. How do you build that? Well, first, the concrete was quite flexible in its ability to translate between the two grids. It also created this plinth that's more civic, more public-facing, more open. So it worked kind of in two ways. The office tower, was wood timber and relatively straightforward, a couple strange rotations that we had to deal with. But this really gave a warmth to the office that really differentiated it from the competitors in the area. One of the first wood office towers in the area and the highest at the moment. In the Vale, we worked with Transolar, environmental consultant, to think through this idea of what we ended up calling breathe spaces. So they're buffer zones between the office climate and the exterior climate. If you've been to the Netherlands, it's very much like today, totally always raining. So having protection in outdoor space, especially in the office, is always beneficial. So early concept study of the form that this kind of draped veil would make on the left, and then on the right, the result of the steel structure that kind of translates the rotations between the upper volume and the lower volume. And in terms of the thickening of this edge, it's really quite literally a kind of delamination of the typical glass facade. So we have, if we're looking through a section, we have triple glazing, very high performing, and we peel one layer out to create this buffer space and make that space between the glass occupiable. Here are the plans. So you can see the three spaces all on different terraces. You're also able from these spaces to exit onto an open terrace as well. And all of the breathe spaces have operability and ventilation, so that you can imagine when it doesn't, the few days in Netherlands when it doesn't rain, it can get quite hot in there, and it allows the heat to escape. So the typical facade is a relatively straightforward system called the unitized system. So they drop in each panel. We also developed this screening, which helps with the solar glare, but also contributes to a kind of depth to the facade. So we wanted to carry this shingling throughout the form to unify it. And it meant that there were a number of very different conditions on the facade. So this is actually a mock-up of not a part of the building, but many, many different conditions throughout the building that we looked at early on to really test the detailing. And here you can see, particularly at these transitional geometries, we don't have any double curved surfaces, but the surfaces are created with flat trapezoid pieces of glass. So those pieces have maximum heights that we calibrated. This is an image of kind of calculating all of the different types and pieces of glass. Straight facade, bringing back the shingling that's required, but in a way that is simpler for an envelope. So the unitized facade is a weather-tight system, whereas this shingled facade is more open and breathable. Here you can see interior view and the construction of it, which you can see the elements coming in for the breathe space attached to the steel structure. And then this is it today, recently opened. So this is, maybe a quite literal example of a kind of thickened edge that's done through a kind of delamination to quite physically create space that didn't necessarily exist. And actually the municipality in the end got in a big fight with the developer because they were not counting this space in the lease because it was outdoor. And then they were like, no, it's indoor, no, it's outdoor. So there was a big argument there about how much space they were allowed to build. They settled it in the end. But you know, it's good when you can make agencies ask those questions. How do you count this space? Which definitely translates to the next part of the talk, which I'll focus on the three housing projects that we've done in Brooklyn. All designed for the same clients, generally with the same team, and working through a set of principles that are then applied to very different contexts and sites. So even though the sites are all within 1.5 miles from each other, so it's a pretty small area that these 3 sites exist in, they still are very, very different and have very different characteristics. And the result was also similar, but different projects. Tank House was the developer who came to us wanting to do something different. Really with the idea of putting outdoor living, putting outdoor circulation on the market in a way that has not been done in New York as of yet. The 2 partners and their dogs on the right. And they were super influential in making these projects come to reality. So before I jump into the projects, I think important to give some context about New York City and maybe particularly housing in New York City. So what you're seeing here is illustration from Hugh Ferris in his prophetic response to the 1916 zoning resolution. So at that time, they had, before that, they had no zoning really, and then they introduced this idea of the sky exposure plane, which he said created a zoning envelope, which he described as a shape in which the law puts into the architect's hands. And then he described this a series of steps that, without the architect even having to think, could take in order to mold that shape into a practical, buildable building. And what was interesting about this book is how in New York, so many buildings look like what he thought they were going to look like. Now, today in 2016, the zoning resolutions have gotten much, much more complex. We no longer rely so much on the sky exposure plane. These zoning regulations have been translated more to setbacks and contextuality, something called quality housing, which all of the projects will fall under. But I think the logic is still there, which is the idea that there's these constraints on the architect from both the zoning side, but also the market side, where maximizing floor area meets zoning resolution, and you lose the opportunity to create anything different than following the steps. So the results, this is a very typical plan for like a corner lot, which is a double loaded corridor. There's some articulation maybe on the street front, maybe not. Maybe there's some brick on the street front. But the courtyard side is kind of flat, blank. And this is, something that we, with Tank House, wanted to question and wanted to find an alternate solution to. And of course, we did not invent exterior circulation. It exists all over the world already for many, many centuries, and especially in warmer climates. Some of the examples you learn about in architecture school don't get a lot of praise. You could ask whether it's the fault of the typology or policy. But in New York, you actually can find some examples of exterior circulation, and even more today. But this is an early one. This is the Riverside Apartments in Brooklyn Heights, worker housing. And it's quite unique in that it pulls the stair to the facade, and there's through ventilation for all the residents. So starting with the first project this is 18 units located in a part of Brooklyn that's kind of between neighborhoods. So you can't see it in the image, but just to the south is Johanesen, which is this industrial area. To the north is this very typical brownstone residential, and then there's downtown Brooklyn all the way in the back, and then just to the west is the NYCHA housing, which is the zoning of kind of tower in the park typology. This is quality housing, so the idea, the zoning regulations are meant to keep the bulk zoning envelope to be as contextual as possible. So we always look, when starting a project, at multiple scales at once. So it's not a linear large to smaller, small to large, but really every scale at the same time, and see how our process and our studies can kind of influence one another. So on the unit scale, on the more immediate scale, but also on the scale of the city. In that middle scale, between the building and the city, there's what we wanted and were interested in emphasizing was thinking through the journey from the city to the front door, which really is at the heart of these projects, is avoiding creating a space where neighbors can interact, where people can spend more time outside in the environment, and bring the city in a way into the building, and the building into the city. So these are all going to be corner sites, as I mentioned. So we looked at how to arrange the mass on the site to create as much porosity as possible. So this, immediately we wanted to make multiple courtyards, to not do just an L-shaped building with one courtyard. It's tricky because units, this is something that the zoning regulations did right, require natural light, what they call legal light and air. So that's what these red arrows represent. And it means that you need to be able, if your bedroom needs to be looking out onto a courtyard of a certain size. But we felt that these smaller courtyards actually still were important, even if they weren't, quote, legal, to create multiple orientations and get light and air from different sides. So we ended up with this kind of 3-tower, 3-courtyard scheme, where one courtyard was connected to the backyards of the brownstone buildings, one courtyard was facing Bond Street, and then the third courtyard was in the middle, smaller and dedicated to circulation, not technically legal light and air, but quite important for the porosity of the building. So when you're standing there, you can see out on 3 sides. We also took these ideas to the unit scale with very similar idea of pulling the mass of the more private closed spaces, the bedrooms and bathrooms, to the side, and having the more public spaces flow more freely through them. And through the unit, we also developed a typology of outdoor spaces for the units. So these would range from a kind of porch or entryway to something larger that could be used to have dinner, more of a terrace, and then still having opportunities for these smaller, more intimate spaces that are more about kind of buffering the immediacy of a room to the exterior. And so each of the units has these 3 types embedded in it, and the way that they work on the plan also takes advantage of the different orientations. And connecting them is the exterior walkway and circulation with one elevator kind of tucked in the west there. So in aerial shots, you see that porosity quite well. You also see the different setbacks and roof spaces that we've used the massing, permitted obstructions, bulkheads, as well as mechanical screens to kind of create more of these pockets of space that are more comfortable to be on and more private. So I mentioned, been talking a lot about porosity. I've been talking about orientations. All of those things are great, but developers hear just $signs because it means that there's more facade. So you have a building that's an L shape. You know exactly how much facade you have. You can calculate it in your spreadsheet. All of a sudden, you start drawing towers and lines, and just $. So we knew already at the start that whatever we chose for the facade material needed to be quite inexpensive because we're almost doubling like the typical facade. And so we chose a very typical CMU veneer block. So these are the same blocks you see on middle schools, dentist offices, and we just adjusted it by turning it vertically and also tilting it just a little bit. And that strengthens a kind of vertical reading of the building, but it also makes a bit of kind of fuzziness that hides maybe imperfections in the installation because we knew that this would be a lot of hands doing the work and not necessarily have the time to craft and not make mistakes. So we wanted to embrace that level of detail. At the balcony block, at the balconies, the block is actually a chord block, which if you can imagine coring a vertical block, that's quite difficult to form. So we had to use the 8x8 block. And in a way, it was a nice surprise to have these 2 textures be subtly next to each other and also differentiating the indoor and outdoor spaces. And again, the verticality helps change the expression of the building throughout the day as light hits it from different angles. And again, there's no back of the building. The material wraps everything, so you don't feel like you're ever behind in a less desirable zone, but every area has an equal amount of care. And the walkways are kind of horizontal, cast-in-place, exposed structural slabs with mesh, full-height mesh, and the lightness of them, of course, contrasts with the solidity of the masonry volumes. Here, the rebar going into the walkways, you can see where the exterior walkway is. It's green, which is epoxy-coated rebar for exterior use. And then all of the walkways are thermally broken. It's getting technical now as well. So this product allows for structural continuity between the slab, but not heat. And then what we did was break up the exterior stair into 3 different portions and use those to kind of create a volumetric reading of the void. And the netting itself actually is another very common product. You see it in bridges or parks, and it's relatively affordable. And it's also quite flexible to install, and adjust on site. So this is looking right at the lobby. All of the shared spaces are exterior. There's a kind of glass enclosure, not quite exterior, just a little bit of protection for the mailroom. You can see here there's a small amenity room behind and parking to the right. But otherwise, all of the shared spaces in the building are exterior. And then you rise up to the first level, and that's where you have access to the shared courtyard to the right. And then the other courtyard in the back is private, but shared between two units. And this is where the stair starts to kind of change, and then move into kind of the gap, and then it comes back into the center, and the mesh kind of folds around it. So this, and sometimes you're kind of walking on the bridge, other times you're close to the wall. So this space really became a space where neighbors can meet each other, and many things happen. The walkways connect, again, these porches, so each unit has what feels like their own porch. And just through a few subtle, careful details, these porches are made to feel more like part of the unit, even though technically they are part of the corridor, which is deductible area, by the way. So the developers agreed to do this. And of course, they're super useful and desirable for the tenants. And the units themselves are not overly large. They're relatively efficient, but they feel quite generous because of the different orientations and the large openings, particularly like in the kitchen, where most New York kitchens are like dark and tiny corners, so even in nice apartments. And then you can see the kind of L-shaped plan and the the terrace just off of the living room, but also adjacent to the kitchen. And these terraces, which we kind of often call loggias because they're the brick is surrounding them, but the openings are large enough to still, so you have both a combination of feeling private and intimate, comfortable enough to have dinner, without compromising the views or light. So what has been rewarding is seeing how people have taken the space to be their own, and park their bikes on the walkways, and really have used that porous space and that thickened edge for their lifestyle. Oof, I'm running out of time. Okay. So I'll go a little bit quicker through these next projects because a lot of the ideas are building on each other, so I won't repeat the same thing for everyone. The next project is a very similar area as the previous project, but in a vertical orientation. So this is the site. This is a corner site, but actually technically it's a 360-degree site, because just to the north of the building is a lot that cannot be built on because it's part of the lot that large hulking building is in behind there, and that lot is overbuilt. So it meant that through this kind of technicality, we're able to think about this site really as a 360-degree site, which of course was also quite challenging. So I'll talk through the principles that we were looking at translating from the lessons that we learned in the Warren project to this more vertical site. And it's kind of summarized here, but I'll walk through them in plan. So we broke down, similar to Warren, we broke down the massing into the scale of the room. And here we're kind of rotating and subtly shifting those rooms to create these pockets of outdoor space and really kind of pull the thermal envelope, the built indoor space, away from the zoning envelope. You could see on the top of the page, that's exterior building circulation. The scissor stairs are pulled out to create some protection to the elevator lobby, but otherwise, similar to Warren, each unit has their own kind of pocket of outdoor space at their entry or their own porch. Yeah, that's an image of that. And you can see similar lessons from Warren, the idea of kind of pulling the more private spaces of the unit apart and then using those rotations and void space to create specificity. So it's not just one large loft building, but really having unique spaces for kitchen and living room, each connected to outdoor space. This image shows us, we designed this very much in design phase during COVID for this project, and there was a lot of thinking about how people are at home, all at home at once, and how you can make different areas for doing different activities. So the room articulation also allowed us to calibrate the section. Needed to be efficient. It's a really tight site, actually. But we also wanted to provide a diverse set of units, both in their interior layouts and bedroom count, but also in their exterior space and the qualities of exterior space. So there's a lot of different types of exterior balconies, terraces that are covered, that are more exposed, that are open to the sky. And that also is really a result of working with these, what they're called permitted obstructions, and making sure that we're using them to their full effect to really soften this hard line of the zoning envelope, which is the thick black line there. On the ground floor, we almost did the opposite and kind of pulled the building in. So really it's kind of hovering above the ground. The first floor is actually partially sunken, so you enter at the lowest part of the site, go down a few steps, and you have the lobby. There's a small amenity space that's sunken below the ground. And then the topography, as you go around the site, terraces upward, and the other entrance is actually goes up to the first floor, or the second floor. And then the amenity space is kind of buffered by these terrace planters. And then an early facade image of this floating collection of volumes wrapped in a unifying veil. And to achieve this concept, we needed a material that could be more fabric-like. So undulating metal paired also with something more cementitious that could be help with the kind of interior courtyard, interior balconies, contrasting with the lightness of the metal and making those spaces feel robust and domestic. And you can see on the right the diagram of how the folded perforated metal kind of veil wraps the entire volume, and the inner facade is this cementitious material. So the exterior volume, we actually have an open joint rain screen with black mineral wool behind, with windows pushed outward. So the veil really feels like fabric draped over a kind of facade. And then at the balconies, this fabric transitions, the same panels transition to become a screen. And so you get the effect of the wrapping veil. And so here we have a typical balcony where we used the structural properties of a corrugated material to span from floor to floor, which helped reduce how much structure we needed behind. So we basically don't have any structure behind. This is a guardrail that the panels will attach back to, but it's not really supporting the full-length panels. Many mock-ups and tests. It's 4 millimeter thick, perforated 3/8-inch staggered holes, and the corrugation's at a depth of 4 inches. So by taking these corrugated aluminum has a very industrial feeling, but by changing these like slight parameters, we've pulled it out of the context and created a more domestic and robust material. The other thing that was quite important is that, particularly at the screen, that there's no front or back to this veil. And by starting with a series of panel types that could be flipped or rotated or mirrored, we could create this pattern that has no front or back, with a combination of curves and folds that also can be combined for a very non-repeating pattern. We studied the tolerances as well of each of the corners. This is the final kind of layout. Each panel was kind of drawn and modeled and sent to be fabricated. Here you get the textures, both at a small scale but also at the larger scale. And construction, I mean, I love this image because it's like the closest thing to the concept image, and kind of beautiful in its own right. But I think once the actual metal was going up, we saw kind of the qualities that it gave. Great. And so the last project is known as the Pink Building, and it's this is actually in terms of area and unit count, maybe like a third larger than the other projects. Also a corner site. It's in Fort Greene. Myrtle Ave is more of a commercial district. Vanderbilt is very much a residential street. You can see here the site itself is actually occupying 2 different zoning boundaries, and the Wallabout Historic District, which is a historic residential district, is right nearby. So the project needed to certainly negotiate between those 2 boundaries, and what we did was kind of create a middle zone that helped with that negotiation. In plan, we are also, again, translating what we learned from the 2 previous projects to a site that really had a really amazing backyard that was connected to all of these other backyards. So we're thinking a lot about porosity, of course, of creating depth on the street front, but also in the backyard. But also this idea of kind of different grounds, and thinking through, again, not just having an abundance of outdoor space, but giving that outdoor space specific qualities, and curating or allowing for multiple journeys, experiences through the outdoor space. So this is a model kind of showing those different terraces. So we wanted to make sure that all of these different levels could be kind of occupied and connected through, again, this project as well, exterior circulation. This is a diagram showing the unit types, which in this project there aren't many actually, because they're all quite different, mostly different. And you can see here the transition, is kind of an early massing model, and the idea of porosity, and this quite important kind of puncture through on the Vanderbilt, the more residential scale that connects the street to that backyard. While on the Myrtle, which is a more commercial frontage, you have a smaller cut through the middle that just acknowledges what's behind. So this is that cut, that residential entry on Vanderbilt. It's a sunken courtyard, a kind of bridge that brings you into the lobby. You can see that on the ground floor here, as well, the commercial that is facing Myrtle to your right, as well as the connection also to the backyard and those terraces. And the plans, again, are really optimized for their location on the site. So the tower has a number of plans that really take advantage of the corner, and then a kind of through units. In the middle there, you see 2 units that are actually split level. And then all the way to the left, you have the more typical of row house style units. So here's looking on the right, the row house. This is a view from the interior looking out, putting a double height space by the backyard. This is an example of one of the split levels that kind of is quite literally, that unit is the transition between the zoning, but using that as an opportunity and not a constraint. And then maybe lastly, to speak about the material of this project, which again, responds specifically to this project, rather than continuing using metal. We wanted to really use precast and experiment with how this kind of tectonic language could work with these kind of rotated rooms that we're working with. You can see on the left all the different panel types, which if you've worked with precast before, that's a very scary image, I think. But we had a great relationship with Gate Precast at that time, and we worked with them with something they've done before for other projects, but they set up a system which allowed for the panels, this fluted pattern, to be kind of on the floor, and then different sets of formwork would change slightly the panel size, the opening size. So it enabled them to create a wider variety of panels without having to rebuild the formwork every time. It also allowed for these kind of corner units where they cast one side and then the other at a second time. These were the mock-ups they did. We were also testing different aggregates, different patterns, and it was quite important that we not just picked a color, but really found the right different stones and the right different grindings. So parts of the building have different levels of sandblasting to achieve those different depths. We have so many pink mock-ups in the office, it's crazy. Here they are on site. They actually closed their North Carolina plant, and then the project was delayed, and they called us and were like, "Are you gonna come get your pink panels?" So they were the last ones standing on the site. but they got there. The other part of this particular project is the site constraints, which are always kind of a nightmare in New York City. But generally precast is very quick. They can do a lot per day. What you want to really optimize is the crane location. So ideally you set up the crane once and you do everything with one location. In this project, we ended up having to move the crane once to reach certain areas. But it's its own science, how the crane works. Here it is going into sites, different attachment details, window going in. We ended up, we did look at using a system that it would pre-install the windows. We ended up going in this method because of supply lines. And then also the different balcony elements. You can see the openings toward the myrtle on the left, and then on the right, this is a view of the lobby, I think almost done being constructed to the backyard. Great, so I will end it there. I hope that you've got a sense from these projects of our process, and also maybe specifically how we've thought about this idea of the edge, and whether it's kind of thickening it or elongating it, layering, or just generally articulating through material use. Our goal is generally to make a space that people can, more space for people to really interact with each other, but also with the environment. And that's really kind of the underpinning, I think, of many of the projects. So thank you, and I can answer any questions.
Thank you so much. I think we have time for just maybe one or two questions before you guys have to go off to class. So who'd like to ask a question?
Thank you for the presentation. I think one thing I'm curious about is, understanding soils work in general, that most of the projects have a kind of fairly, what maybe I would call like atmospheric concept or material concept. Can you maybe talk about how those concepts sort of survive and absorb all the constraints that are thrown at it throughout the development process?
Yeah. I can definitely think of some specific cases, but I think generally there's some strategic things that we do, and we know every project, the budget is a question. So part of how we think about materials strategically is using everyday common materials that can be within budgets will much more likely stay till the end, or you can swap out for something similar. So really understanding the process of what is typical and what are the ways in which we can kind of hack the system. But I will say it's always a completely new learning experience, because we really use the project to test these questions. But if from the beginning it's not already an expensive material, it's much more likely that we'll get to the end and be able to do something interesting. So that's like a small strategic thing. I think the other thing has been, I think it's certainly less painful, but definitely I think a better outcome when we've partnered with either fabricators or design partners, design assist partners, to work on the fabrication of these details together, because we are learning from them and they know much more than us. So that's probably the biggest piece that contributes to the success rate.
Any other questions? I might just make a comment. If not, no.
So quiet.
I just want to make a comment because it was just to say thank you, but also so nice to see the work and to learn more about it, the process of how you go from like a really challenging site and question and the economies and materials of that. And I just think for you all to see that process, many of you are in that process, right? Maybe not to the degree of getting it built yet, but hopefully just like all the different kinds of drawings. Some of the, Mark and I were like, oh, look at that drawing, so different kinds of drawings, different kinds of modeling, different material tests, and just using all of these like very challenging constraints in really innovative ways. So just fantastic for you guys, hopefully, to see that and to understand the kind of experimentation that can go into problems and programs and sites that are actually pretty challenging. So finding that openness, I guess, in the process was really great to see. And hopefully, we'll inspire our group as they work through your own projects. So thank you so much again for joining us.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.